Hello everyone. This screencast is aimed at teaching you how to create your own integrated library using Altium Designer. Why would you want to do this? Well, sometimes you actually can't find an existing component footprint in the libraries that are online, and so why not just create your own? It allows you an incredible amount of power in customizing your own PCB designs. Building your own custom library allows you to use components that have particularly unique footprints that you can't find elsewhere. It also allows you to ensure that the footprints on your design are correct. It also allows you a couple of customizable features. You can change your schematic parts, meaning that you can move where the pins connect to a part to allow for more convenient wiring to make for a neater schematic. And similarly in the PCB, you can customize your component footprints to include additional information. For example, if a footprint for an object did not contain an outline of that object and you wanted that outline, you could put that in. So in Altium, the file that you'll be generating is called an integrated library. Integrated means that it's combining both a schematic library and a PCB library. And there's several types of libraries in Altium. The integrated library is very nice because it's easily portable and shareable as a single file. All you have to do is compile this single file, send it to someone else, and they can access all of the components. So the steps involved in Altium to create an integrated library, the first step is to create a project, an integrated library project. It's a specific type of project, and let's do that in Altium right away. Select File, New, and you're looking for Project. So typically we would use a PCB project where we're designing a board, but in this case we're going to use the integrated library project, and you may choose to name your library. I'm going to just call it My Integrated Library. It's being stored in my default Altium folder, and OK. So there we have a blank integrated library. So let's move on to the next step. Very similar to the way we create a PCB document is to start with the schematic. So we're actually going to be creating an entire schematic library. It will hold the schematic elements for all the different components that you want in your library. So the easiest way to add a schematic library is to right-click your integrated library in the project view, select Add New to Project, and then you're looking for the second option, Schematic Library. You can also see there are several other types of libraries that you can use in an integrated library, such as PCB, a PADVI library, and VHDL components. But we want schematic, and it will create an empty schematic library. So this is your schematic library editor. You can access it via these bottom left options shown here. So when you go to the Projects tab, you can see your integrated library and all of its subcomponents. And any time you want to add schematic components, you have to go to this tab, the Schematic Library Editor. So just an overview of this menu. The top left contains all of the components that currently exist in the library. Altium by default will create an empty component called component_1, and it's just basically a blank component that we'll be editing later. Aliases, you can name one component with different names because sometimes you have similar components that have the same footprint and the same schematic, however they have different characteristics. So one chip might have several variations, and typically that's what you use aliases for. This third menu window shows all of the pins in the current schematic component, and the next one shows all of the PCB footprints assigned to that schematic component. And this bottom one here allows you to tie your schematic component to an online supplier such as Element 14. Very useful steps, and we'll go through specifically how to use them all in a subsequent screencast. So let's go back to our projects menu, and the next step will be to create a PCB library. So it's the similar process. Right-click your integrated library project, select Add New to Project, and then PCB library. So now we've seen the PCB library editor. And again, it's similar to your PCB layout editor. However, you will have a series of components that you can choose from. And rather than dropping in components, you're actually placing lines and shapes to create a component. This section here is the component primitives window. And it basically lists all the different objects that you've used to create your PCB component. At the top here are the list of PCB components that we've used, and again Altium has created a default component that we can modify later. The fourth step in creating an integrated library is to actually design your component schematics and footprints using the schematic editor and the PCB editor. So what we're going to be showing you later is specifically how to create three types of components: a through-hole component, a surface mount component, followed by an image component where you can actually drag in a graphic and customize it and print it on your board. The final step in creating an integrated library is to compile your project. So basically you will be compiling the schematic document and the PCB document together, and it will produce a single standalone integrated library file that you can share with someone else. Let's demonstrate that process. So before I continue, I'm just going to save all my work. I'll save everything that I've created, and I have to give them names. So for my PCB library, I shall call it my PCB library, and my schematic library I will call my schematic library. And now let's try compiling the project. So all we should see are the two default schematic and PCB components in our compiled library. So to compile the library, you select the project and the very top option, compile integrated library. So it's producing that standalone file, and we'll be able to access it in Windows Explorer. So go to your project folder in Altium. My project folder is in my documents, and I'm looking for my integrated library. So the compiled integrated library file is usually stored in the folder project outputs for your library, and we'll open that up, and here we have our integrated library. So this is something that you could share with someone else. They could install it and access all the components that you create. So in Altium, it automatically, whenever you compile your library project, if the project is currently open in your Altium window, it will automatically install it into your library file. So I can go to my integrated library, and as you can see, there's the schematic component that we've created, and currently now it's just an empty component that doesn't have anything tied to it. It may also be useful just to show you a completed library and what that will look like. So I'm going to open up a library that we prepared earlier. So this is our JCU component library, JCU library, and there's our project. So this is a very similar layout. However, the components have been populated. We've created a series of schematic components and a series of PCB components. So this is the schematic library, and as you can see, we've populated with a variety of different components, and each component is tied to its footprint, which also exists in the PCB library. So these are all the PCB footprints that we've chosen. And you will notice that there are actually less footprints than there are schematic components, because some schematic components use the same footprint. So ideally, at the end of this screencasts, you will have an integrated library with a couple of components, and hopefully you will have the tools to be able to create your own complex components going forward.